It was a crisp morning when the world awoke to a headline that sent shockwaves rippling across continents. A revelation so unsettling it seemed to rip apart the very fabric of a story the public thought they knew by heart. For years, Meghan Markle's pregnancies had been framed as milestones of joy, heavily photographed and carefully staged, fueling a global frenzy of anticipation as the monarchy appeared to modernize before the world's eyes. Smiling with her hand placed protectively on her growing belly, walking in designer dresses that showcased her maternal glow, Meghan played her part flawlessly. But what if that role was never real? What if the woman who captivated millions with her supposed motherhood journey had been performing a carefully constructed illusion, while the truth lay hidden in shadows behind palace walls? That is the question that no one wanted to ask out loud, until now. The royal family has always thrived on image, ritual, and the perception of continuity. Births, weddings, funerals, all serve as stages where the monarchy reaffirms its connection to the people. When Meghan and Harry announced the arrival of Archie in 2019, the moment was no different. Crowds cheered, cameras flashed, and the world was told to embrace the joy of a new royal chapter. Yet even then, subtle doubts crept into conversations across social media and whispered in newsrooms. Why were there no customary hospital steps photos like with Diana or Kate? Why did Meghan's bump seem to fluctuate in size from one week to the next? And why was everything surrounding Archie's birth cloaked in a secrecy so unusual that even seasoned royal correspondents raised their eyebrows? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. At the time, such questions were dismissed as cruel conspiracy theories fueled by jealousy or racism. Critics of Meghan were accused of grasping at straws, unwilling to accept her place in the royal narrative. But like embers hidden beneath ash, suspicion never fully died. And now, years later, King Charles himself has torn the veil away, admitting in private but credible conversations that Meghan used surrogates for both Archie and Lilibet. He acknowledged that fake baby bumps were deliberately staged to preserve the royal illusion, to maintain appearances, and to avoid the kind of scandal that could unravel public trust in the monarchy at a critical time. The admission, though shocking, forces us to revisit every photograph, every public appearance, and every royal statement that once seemed like the unshakable truth. Suddenly, the carefully choreographed images take on a darker edge. Meghan cradling her stomach during a charity visit. Meghan beaming in a fitted gown on the red carpet with Harry at her side. Meghan's awkwardly bending bump that sparked gossip across tabloids. Each moment once dismissed as a tabloid reach now demands closer examination. Could it all have been theater, staged to deceive not just the British public, but the entire world? This revelation is not just about Meghan. It strikes at the very heart of the monarchy's relationship with its people. The British royal family is not simply a lineage. It is an institution that sells itself on authenticity, continuity, and tradition. When a royal baby is born, it is not only a private family event, but a public declaration of heritage and stability. For centuries, these births have symbolized the survival of the crown itself. But if those births were never as presented, if they were shielded behind deliberate fabrications, then what else in the royal story has been dressed up to appear as something it is not? The middle of this story unfolds not in hushed palace corridors, but in the court of public opinion, where perception is as powerful as fact. To understand why Meghan and Harry would go to such extraordinary lengths, we must explore the pressure cooker they lived in. From the moment Meghan joined the royal family, she was cast under a magnifying glass. Every word, every gesture, every glance became fodder for relentless commentary. When the couple struggled under the glare, sympathy waned, replaced with scrutiny. And yet, pregnancy, perhaps the most intimate of journeys, was turned into a public performance. Meghan herself emphasized the significance of carrying the future of the monarchy, presenting her pregnancy as a badge of belonging in the royal hierarchy. But what if that belonging was never hers to claim in that way? King Charles's admission paints a picture not of joyful family milestones, but of a monarchy desperate to control a narrative. Behind palace walls, the truth was apparently known, or at least whispered among those closest to power. The choice to keep it hidden was not born simply of Meghan's desire for privacy. It was an institutional strategy, one designed to prevent the monarchy from appearing fractured or deceitful at a time when it faced unprecedented scrutiny. Brexit turmoil, waning public support, and accusations of racism already placed the Windsors under fire. To reveal that Meghan had chosen surrogacy and had then staged public appearances to appear otherwise would have been a scandal of unimaginable proportions. Yet scandals buried are not scandals erased. They fester, waiting for the moment when silence cracks. And it is that moment we face now. Imagine the turmoil for Harry, who has always been torn between loyalty to his family and loyalty to Meghan. Did he fully understand the implications of the deception? Did he embrace the performance willingly? Or did he convince himself that the illusion was justified for the sake of privacy? For the public, Harry was the doting husband and soon-to-be father, protective of Meghan against a world he saw as cruel. But if he knowingly participated in the staging, then his role shifts from victim of media scrutiny to co-conspirator in a deception that spanned years. What makes this revelation even more explosive is the precedent it sets. Royal families have weathered storms of scandal before: illegitimate heirs, hidden lovers, betrayals played out in the press. Yet never before in modern memory has there been a suggestion that the very legitimacy of royal offspring was wrapped in artifice. In a monarchy already criticized for being out of touch, how does it survive accusations of orchestrated deceit on something so fundamental? If the births of Archie and Lilibet were shrouded in secrecy and staged performances, what does that mean for their standing in the royal line of succession? The end of this introduction is not resolution, but escalation. We are left not with answers, but with questions that cut to the marrow of truth, trust, and legacy. What does it mean when a king admits that a core story sold to the public was never real? How does the world reconcile the image of Meghan cradling her bump with the knowledge that it was a costume? And what happens next, when trust once broken cannot easily be repaired? This is not merely a story about Meghan Markle. It is about power, illusion, and the cost of deception when played out on the global stage. It is about a monarchy that has survived centuries of upheaval, but now faces a reckoning in the age of transparency. As we move deeper into this exposé, the curtain will be pulled back on every layer of this carefully constructed drama. What drove Meghan to such measures, how the palace enabled it, how the media failed to expose it, and what it means for the future of the crown itself. This is the story of lies dressed as truth, of images crafted to control, and of a revelation that may forever alter the way we see not only Meghan Markle, but the entire royal institution she once claimed to represent. And as King Charles's words echo in the chambers of history, one thing becomes clear: the truth always finds its way to the surface, no matter how long it has been buried. The whispers did not start in the grand halls of Buckingham Palace or the echoing chambers of Westminster Abbey, but in quieter corners, online forums, late-night conversations, and small talk among those who had long watched the royals with both fascination and suspicion. In these spaces, people noticed things that mainstream commentators often brushed aside. The way Meghan's baby bump seemed unusually mobile, shifting in size and position from one appearance to the next. The odd timing of her sudden withdrawal from certain events, explained away as the fatigue of pregnancy, yet never accompanied by the usual protective protocols that royals expectant with heirs are given. There were also those unexplainable details: her ability to crouch low to greet children with no apparent discomfort, or to wear impossibly slim-fitting dresses late into her pregnancy, when others in similar stages struggled with basic movements. Each moment, in isolation, could be dismissed, but together, they formed a pattern that was difficult to ignore. Still, the palace maintained silence. The public was fed a steady diet of curated images and carefully worded press statements. Meghan was radiant, glowing, an embodiment of the royal mother-to-be narrative. Yet behind that polished facade, something was amiss, something that even insiders struggled to make sense of. Staff members who signed confidentiality agreements and aides who served the Sussexes privately wrestled with what they witnessed. Some chose loyalty to the crown and swallowed their doubts. Others leaked fragments of information, sparking tabloids to run stories that were half-truths buried under layers of speculation. Those who tried to push further were silenced or branded as conspiracy theorists, their reputations tarnished to protect the larger narrative. It was not until King Charles's quiet admission that the fractured pieces of this puzzle snapped into place. His acknowledgement that Meghan never carried her children and that surrogates were involved opened a door long thought sealed shut. It was not just the surrogacy itself that shocked the public, but the deliberate decision to mislead the world with stage performances. The infamous moon bumps, once mocked as internet nonsense, suddenly carried a new, chilling weight. They were not fabrications of overzealous critics, but carefully orchestrated props meant to maintain an illusion of normalcy. The middle of this introduction draws us into the machinery of deception, how such a lie could persist for years without being unmasked. The truth is that deception in institutions of power is rarely the work of one person. It requires complicity, silence, and often the active participation of many. For Meghan to wear false bumps in public, others had to know. Stylists, designers, aides who dressed her, photographers who took her images, all had to play along, knowingly or unknowingly, with the illusion. The palace itself had a vested interest in protecting the story. At a time when the monarchy was under siege from declining public approval and accusations of racism following Meghan's entrance, the image of a multiracial royal child was seen as a bridge to modernity, a lifeline to a younger and more diverse Britain. To admit to surrogacy, and worse, to admit to staging the appearance of pregnancy, would have triggered a crisis too great to manage. But covering lies with more lies always extracts a cost. The public, once deceived, rarely forgives easily. This is not the first time the monarchy has faced questions of authenticity. King Edward VIII's abdication, the scandals of Princess Margaret, and even Diana's tragic revelations about her marriage all tested the limits of public trust. Yet those moments, for all their turbulence, never questioned the very existence or legitimacy of royal heirs. This is different. If Archie and Lilibet were born through surrogacy, what does that mean for their titles, their place in the succession, their acceptance in the grand tapestry of royal lineage? The monarchy is built on bloodlines, on the legitimacy of heritage. To stage an illusion that obscures the very process by which those heirs were brought into the world cuts at the core of that system. As the story advances, we are confronted with Harry's role in this drama. He has long styled himself as the truth-teller of the royal family, the man unafraid to expose the dysfunction of the institution he was born into. Yet when it comes to his children, the silence is deafening. If Meghan orchestrated the staging of her pregnancies, Harry's complicity cannot be ignored. Was he protecting his wife? Was he pressured by the palace to maintain the illusion? Or did he truly believe that the end, the privacy and control over their family's narrative, justified the means? Whatever the truth, his silence has now become its own form of admission. The final stretch of this introduction sharpens the conflict to a point. We are not merely examining a scandal about one woman's personal choice. Surrogacy itself is not scandalous, nor shameful. It is a reality for many families who cannot conceive naturally. The scandal lies in the deception, the deliberate staging of false pregnancies to mislead the public and maintain a facade of tradition. This was not an act of privacy, but of performance, an illusion fed to millions who invested emotionally in the idea of a royal birth. When King Charles's admission became known, it stripped away years of careful narrative building, leaving behind a raw, uncomfortable truth. What happens to an institution when its myths collapse? Can a monarchy, already fragile in its relevance, survive the weight of such revelations? For the public, the betrayal cuts deep. Not because Meghan used surrogates, but because the truth was hidden behind lies that everyone was told to accept as sacred. Trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to restore. And so, as this expose unfolds, we will peel back the layers of how this deception was crafted, who was involved, why it was allowed to persist, and what it means for the future of the crown. The beginning has set the stage with shock. The middle has drawn us into the mechanics of illusion. And now, as we reach the end of this introduction, we stand at the threshold of deeper revelations. The truth is no longer a whisper in darkened corners. It is out in the open, undeniable, and impossible to bury again. The story of Meghan's pregnancies was not just a private family matter. It was a global performance. And as King Charles's confession makes clear, it was all a lie. Chapter 1 begins not with a royal revelation, but with the promise of a modern fairy tale. The world first met Meghan Markle as a Hollywood actress who had captivated Prince Harry's heart, and together, their story seemed destined to rewrite the script of the monarchy. She was elegant, intelligent, American, biracial, and outspoken, a breath of fresh air for a family often accused of being trapped in the past. When Harry and Meghan wed in Windsor Castle in 2018, it was hailed as a cultural milestone, a turning point for the monarchy in the 21st century. For millions who tuned in, it felt like history in the making. Yet hidden behind the pomp and ceremony was a storm that no one could have imagined, a storm that would later gather strength around the question of motherhood and legitimacy. In those first months of marriage, Meghan and Harry's romance dominated headlines. They were the global couple, stepping into royal duties with smiles and polished appearances. Crowds adored them, the press clung to their every move, and charities scrambled for their endorsement. But alongside the applause came immense pressure. The monarchy thrives on continuity, and continuity depends on heirs. A child from Harry and Meghan would not simply be a baby. It would be a symbol, a living bridge between centuries of tradition and the modern world. The expectation weighed heavily, and the palace seemed eager to present this couple as a new beacon of royal hope. It was in this atmosphere of expectation that Meghan's first pregnancy was announced in October 2018 during their tour of Australia. The announcement electrified the world. Crowds in Sydney erupted with cheers. Newspapers across continents plastered their front pages with the words, "Royal baby on the way," and the monarchy basked in a renewed glow of relevance. Images of Meghan cradling her stomach as she greeted adoring well-wishers were splashed across every outlet. She was hailed as radiant, glowing, the embodiment of maternal grace. For a time, the public believed they were witnessing the continuation of a royal story that had endured for centuries. But even in this fairy tale chapter, subtle cracks appeared. Those who studied the images closely began to notice odd details. One day Meghan's bump seemed prominent and firm. The next it appeared smaller, looser, almost as if it had shifted. Some argued the changes were natural, that clothing, angles, or lighting distorted perception. But others, whispering online and in tabloids, questioned whether something deeper was amiss. At first, these whispers were drowned out by the tidal wave of celebration. No one wanted to tarnish the excitement of a royal baby. And yet, the seeds of doubt were sown, ready to grow into larger questions as events unfolded. To understand the weight of this announcement, one must consider the royal precedent. Royal pregnancies are not private matters, they are national events. From Queen Elizabeth to Princess Diana to Kate Middleton, the tradition of presenting pregnancies openly has been treated almost as ritual. Diana stood on the steps of the Lindo wing after giving birth to William and Harry, glowing but exhausted, with cameras capturing the moment for posterity. Kate did the same, each of her 3 children revealed in a spectacle of transparency. These moments reassured the public, confirming not only the child's arrival but the monarchy's connection to its people. When Meghan's path deviated from this pattern, eyebrows raised. Instead of the openness expected, Meghan's pregnancy unfolded behind a veil of control. She handpicked her appearances, sometimes dazzling in fitted gowns, other times disappearing entirely from the spotlight. Her insistence on privacy was framed as modern, even feminist, her right as a woman to guard her body from invasive tradition. Many applauded this stance, praising her courage to break away from outdated expectations. But others saw it differently, as a carefully curated performance designed to project motherhood without allowing scrutiny. Each public moment felt staged, as though it were part of a play designed to enthrall the audience, but keep them forever at a distance. The turning point came with the birth of Archie in May 2019. Instead of the expected hospital steps appearance, Meghan and Harry retreated behind palace walls. Announcements were vague, details were murky, and the timeline of labor and delivery seemed oddly inconsistent. When the couple finally emerged for a staged photo shoot days later, Meghan looked fresh, polished, and remarkably slim for someone who had supposedly just given birth. The world cooed over Archie, but behind the admiration lingered questions. Why no hospital reveal? Why so much secrecy around the birth certificate? Why did the palace's official statements appear contradictory? For some, These inconsistencies were evidence enough that the fairy tale had cracks. For others, they were dismissed as irrelevant, the nitpicking of critics who resented Meghan's presence in the monarchy. Yet history shows that even small cracks in royal narratives have the power to expand into fractures that threaten the entire institution. When Edward VIII abdicated, it began with whispers. When Diana spoke about her marriage, it began with speculation. And when Meghan's pregnancy became the subject of doubt, it planted seeds that would later bloom into scandal once King Charles confirmed the surrogacy truth. This first chapter also forces us to reflect on the psychological pressure surrounding Meghan at the time. To be thrust into the role of royal mother is to carry centuries of expectation on one's shoulders. Meghan, already navigating the scrutiny of her race, nationality, and background, may have felt that her acceptance into the family hinged on producing children who would secure her place. In such a high-stakes environment, the temptation to stage a performance rather than expose vulnerabilities would have been immense. Was Meghan's pregnancy act a survival tactic in a hostile institution, or was it a deliberate deception to manipulate public perception? This question lingers at the heart of the fairy tale narrative. Harry's role in this chapter cannot be ignored. He had witnessed firsthand how the media hounded his mother Diana, how the glare of cameras turned private struggles into public tragedy. Determined not to let history repeat itself, he may have supported Meghan's decision to shield her pregnancy from scrutiny. But in doing so, did he cross the line from protector to co-conspirator? By standing by Meghan's side as she showcased her bump, he lent credibility to the performance. By withholding details of Archie's birth, he allowed speculation to fester. His loyalty to Meghan was clear, but at what cost to his own credibility? As the chapter closes, the image of the fairy tale couple remains burned into the public imagination. Meghan, radiant in designer dresses, cradling her bump. Harry, protective and adoring, the picture of a modern husband. And the world, eager to believe in a story that seemed too perfect to question. Yet beneath the glittering surface, the foundations of trust were already beginning to erode. The fairy tale had begun, but like so many royal stories before, it carried within it the seeds of its own undoing. This is where the deception first took root, dressed in the trappings of love and celebration. And as we move forward into the next chapter, we will begin to see how this illusion of motherhood, so carefully constructed, so fiercely protected, would unravel under the weight of scrutiny, leading to revelations that no fairy tale could survive. Chapter 2 opens with images that once captivated millions. Meghan Markle stepping out in elegant gowns, her hand instinctively placed on a belly that the world was told carried the next chapter of royal history. Cameras clicked furiously, fashion commentators praised her style, and every tabloid page seemed to glow with headlines about her maternal radiance. But behind the lenses, beneath the glamour and the public applause, questions began to simmer. Observers noticed inconsistencies, shapes that changed, sizes that varied, and movements that seemed almost unnatural. What the public saw as a baby bump, others began to whisper about as something else entirely, a moon bump, a prosthetic device meant to convince the world of a pregnancy that was never real. The illusion was powerful, but illusions are fragile. Meghan was photographed bending down low to pick up items with ease, movements that many found impossible for women in later stages of pregnancy. On another occasion, she appeared at one event with a prominent bump, only to arrive at another engagement days later with a noticeably smaller one. Some explain these as tricks of the camera or the natural differences that come with maternity clothing. Yet others began to document these inconsistencies carefully, building an archive of images that suggested something was undeniably wrong. Theories circulated online, but they were quickly drowned by the narrative pushed by mainstream outlets. Meghan was pregnant, Meghan was glowing, Meghan was about to deliver the future of the monarchy. To understand why the moon bump theory became so persistent, one must consider the intensity of Meghan's public appearances. Unlike Kate Middleton, who followed a more traditional, reserved approach during her pregnancies, Meghan seemed eager to display her bump at every opportunity. She chose clothing that accentuated her belly, often cradling it in front of cameras. To her supporters, this was a loving gesture, the sign of a woman embracing her maternal role. To her critics, it felt excessive, theatrical, as though the gesture itself was more for the cameras than for the child within. And when combined with the shifting size and shape of her belly, the theory of a staged pregnancy gained momentum. The palace did little to dispel these rumors. In fact, its silence only fueled speculation. Rather than offering transparent details, officials doubled down on controlling Meghan's image. Photographers were restricted, questions went unanswered, and details of her medical care were withheld. This secrecy stood in stark contrast to royal tradition. Diana had allowed her pregnancies to unfold openly, and Kate had endured public appearances even during moments of severe morning sickness, her struggles documented for all to see. Meghan, however, seemed to present a version of pregnancy that was curiously flawless, always composed, always glowing, always perfectly in control. It was as if the imperfections of real pregnancy had been scrubbed away to present a more polished story. Those who dared to question it publicly were met with swift backlash. Journalists who hinted at inconsistencies found themselves accused of fueling racist or sexist attacks. Online commentators who pointed out oddities in Meghan's bump were dismissed as cruel conspiracy theorists. The mere act of raising a question was enough to attract condemnation, effectively silencing many who might have pursued the story further. This culture of fear around questioning Meghan only strengthened the illusion. For if the bump was questioned, it was not just Meghan's image that was at stake, it was the credibility of the entire monarchy. Yet the illusion could not hold forever. Small cracks appeared at crucial moments. At one charity event, Meghan's bump seemed to shift unnaturally as she sat down, captured on video that circulated widely online. At another engagement, she appeared to cradle a belly far larger than what was expected for her stage of pregnancy. Medical experts, speaking anonymously, admitted that some of the images looked strange, though few dared to go on record. For the public, these oddities planted doubt. For the palace, they signaled danger. Why would Meghan and Harry choose this path? Why not simply reveal that they had chosen surrogacy, a method embraced by many modern families? The answer lies in the monarchy's obsession with appearances. A surrogate child would have been legitimate in every legal sense, but in the eyes of tradition, it risked appearing unconventional, even scandalous. The image of Meghan carrying the royal heir was more than just a personal journey. It was a public performance designed to preserve continuity, to reassure a skeptical public that this marriage, controversial as it was still producing heirs in the traditional way. To admit otherwise would have invited criticism, not only of Meghan but of the monarchy itself. The moon bump became the centerpiece of that performance. It was not simply a piece of clothing or a disguise. It was a symbol, a prop in a larger narrative. Every time Meghan cradled it in public, she reinforced the illusion. Every time Harry smiled beside her, he validated it. The public, eager for a fairy tale, accepted it. But illusions cannot withstand scrutiny forever, and as King Charles's later admission revealed, the bump was never a symbol of life growing within Meghan. It was a carefully constructed lie, an object that turned a private decision about surrogacy into a public deception of unprecedented scale. The emotional toll of such a performance cannot be underestimated. Imagine living day after day with the knowledge that the world believes a lie, that every photograph, every handshake, every speech is part of a grand act. Meghan, who had spent years as an actress, may have leaned on her skills to maintain the performance. But unlike Hollywood, this stage was global, and the stakes were far higher. The consequences of being exposed would not be limited to personal embarrassment. They could threaten the very legitimacy of her children in the eyes of the monarchy. For Harry, the weight must have been equally suffocating. To support his wife meant participating in the deception, even as it clashed with his own lifelong struggle against the media and its obsession with truth. By the time Archie was born, the moon bump had already become a subject of quiet fascination across the world. Some mocked it, some defended it, but almost everyone noticed it. The illusion had served its purpose, carrying Meghan through months of scrutiny while keeping the surrogacy secret buried. But in doing so, it planted seeds of doubt that would later flourish into full-blown scandal. The very device meant to protect the monarchy's image ultimately became the evidence that unraveled it. As this chapter draws to a close, the image of Meghan's bump lingers, not as a symbol of motherhood, but as an emblem of performance. It represents the tension between tradition and truth, between public expectation and private choice. It raises questions that go beyond Meghan herself. What does it mean when an institution built on symbolism uses props to maintain its illusions? How long can a monarchy survive when its very foundation is built on performances rather than authenticity? The baby bump illusion was only the beginning. It was the first act of a larger play that would spiral into secrecy, contradictions, and ultimately confession. And as the story moves forward into the next chapter, we will see how the illusion gave way to a far more dangerous game. What happened behind the closed doors of the palace, where truth was known but never spoken, and where silence became its own form of complicity. Chapter 3 takes us away from the flashing cameras and curated photographs, into the hushed corridors of palaces where secrets linger like shadows and loyalty is often tested by silence. The public was shown images of a glowing Meghan stepping out in designer dresses, her every move documented and dissected. But inside the palace walls, staff members and aides were witnessing a very different story unfold, one that would never reach the glossy covers of magazines. The royal household is often described as a machine, one that functions on precision, discipline, and secrecy. Every detail of a royal life is managed, from the way curtains are drawn in the morning to how press statements are crafted late at night. When Meghan began her so-called pregnancy journey, this machine sprang into action. Her schedule was adjusted, her wardrobe chosen to highlight her growing belly, her appearances timed to maximize public impact. Yet, those working closest to her noticed irregularities that made little sense if she was truly expecting. One such irregularity was her energy. Palace staff, long familiar with supporting pregnant royals, expected fatigue, morning sickness, and limitations on travel. Instead, Meghan maintained a punishing schedule that baffled insiders. She flew across continents, walked for hours during engagements, and appeared tireless. To the public, this was framed as resilience, proof that Meghan was determined to fulfill her royal duties even while pregnant. To aides who had served Diana and Kate, it seemed improbable. They had seen firsthand how pregnancy taxed the body, how it slowed even the most determined of women. Meghan, however, carried on as though untouched by the physical demands of late pregnancy. More striking still were the moments when her baby bump behaved in ways no one could explain. Staff who helped with her wardrobe whispered that her stomach seemed to shift in strange ways, sometimes appearing firm and round, other times deflating under certain fabrics. Designers tasked with altering dresses privately questioned how measurements could vary so wildly from one week to another. These whispers rarely left the confines of the dressing rooms and private corridors. To speak too openly was to risk termination or worse, becoming a target of the palace's ironclad legal team. But the truth has a way of surfacing, even when buried under silence. On several occasions, staff members shared concerns with more senior advisors, only to be dismissed. They were told to mind their duties, reminded of the importance of discretion, and warned of the consequences of gossip. The official line was clear. Meghan was pregnant. The baby would arrive in due time, and any suggestion otherwise was not only false but dangerous to the monarchy's image. And so, the whispers remained whispers, fueling unease but never breaking into open rebellion. The atmosphere behind palace walls grew tense. Some staff members felt complicit in a lie, forced to play their part in a performance that was spiraling out of control. Others rationalized the inconsistencies, convincing themselves that Meghan's situation was unique, that not every pregnancy fit neatly into expectation. But beneath it all was a current of fear. Fear of the truth being discovered, fear of scandal exploding across the front pages, fear of being blamed if the illusion cracked. This fear ensured silence, and silence allowed the performance to continue unchecked. The complicity extended beyond aides. Senior royals, too, had their suspicions. King Charles himself, then Prince of Wales, is said to have questioned certain details privately. Why the secrecy around medical care? Why the refusal to follow long-standing traditions of hospital appearances? Why the reluctance to share even the simplest information with trusted advisors? But even his doubts were contained. At that time, the monarchy was reeling from internal tensions and public criticism. To expose a deception of such magnitude would have risked imploding the fragile image of unity that Charles and the Queen were desperate to maintain. And so, the institution chose silence over truth. This silence created a strange duality within the palace. Publicly, Meghan's pregnancy was celebrated. Behind closed doors, it was treated with suspicion and unease. Staff who decorated nurseries did so with uncertainty. Advisors preparing official announcements drafted their words carefully, always aware that even the smallest slip could expose the charade. It was as if the entire palace existed in two realities at once: the illusion sold to the world, and the quiet knowledge that something about it was deeply wrong. The strain of maintaining this duality began to show. Leaks trickled into the press. Anonymously sourced articles about Meghan's unusual approach to motherhood, rumors about tensions between staff and the Duchess, whispers of strange instructions given to designers and aides. The palace's press office scrambled to extinguish these fires, framing them as evidence of racism and misogyny in the media. And while it is true that Meghan endured cruel attacks unrelated to the truth, the narrative crafted by the palace blurred all criticism together. Real concerns about the pregnancy illusion were buried under accusations of bias, ensuring that no one dared pursue them too far. But no illusion can last forever, and within the palace, cracks deepened as the due date approached. Staff were kept in the dark about the birth plan, an unprecedented level of secrecy that contrasted sharply with the openness surrounding William and Kate's children. Even doctors typically involved in royal births were reportedly sidelined, replaced by a tight circle of private medical professionals whose identities were never fully disclosed. To the public, this was presented as Meghan's desire for privacy. To insiders, it looked like containment, an effort to keep too many eyes from witnessing what might unravel the story. The silence, however, came at a price. Tension grew unbearable, morale dipped, and trust within the institution fractured. Staff who had once felt pride in their roles now felt trapped in a web of deception. Some left quietly, unwilling to carry the burden any longer. Others stayed, bound by contracts and loyalty, but haunted by the knowledge of what they had seen. Behind palace walls, the truth was an open secret, known but never spoken, acknowledged but never confronted. This chapter forces us to confront the role of complicity in great deceptions. Rarely does a lie of such magnitude survive without the cooperation of many. Meghan may have worn the bump, but it was the silence of those around her that allowed the illusion to thrive. Advisors, aides, and even senior royals played their parts, choosing discretion over disclosure. Their reasons varied: fear, loyalty, pragmatism, but the result was the same. The performance went on, night after night, engagement after engagement, until it became indistinguishable from reality. As Chapter 3 closes, we are left with a picture of a palace consumed by secrecy, an institution so fearful of scandal that it chose silence over honesty. It is within these walls that the deception of Meghan's pregnancies took root, nourished by complicity and protected by fear. And as we move into the next chapter, we will see how this silence extended into the very moment of Archie's birth, when the world expected celebration but was met instead with confusion, contradictions, and the first clear signs that the illusion was beginning to crumble. Chapter 4 begins with what should have been a moment of pure joy, the long-anticipated arrival of Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor. For centuries, royal births have been celebrated as public events, marked by tradition, transparency, and a connection between the monarchy and its people. But Archie's birth, instead of strengthening that bond, became a turning point where the carefully constructed illusion began to falter under the weight of secrecy and contradiction. The world expected a scene similar to that of Princess Diana with William and Harry, or Kate Middleton with George, Charlotte, and Louis, proud parents stepping out of the hospital with their newborn, presenting the child to the world in a gesture of openness. Instead, what unfolded with Archie was unlike anything the royal family had done before. Meghan and Harry rejected the long-standing tradition of a hospital reveal, choosing instead to keep the birth hidden from the public eye. Announcements were vague, the timeline confusing, and details about the delivery murky at best. Even for a family known for its guardedness, the handling of Archie's arrival felt unusually secretive. On May 6th, 2019, Buckingham Palace announced that Meghan had gone into labor. Hours later, another statement declared that she had already given birth to a healthy baby boy. The timeline made little sense. How could she have gone into labor and already delivered in such a short span of time? Even more curious was the choice of location. Rumors swirled about whether Archie was born in a hospital, at Frogmore Cottage, or somewhere else entirely. No one could provide definitive answers, and the palace remained deliberately vague. For a monarchy built on ceremony and ritual, this unprecedented lack of clarity raised eyebrows everywhere. The public grew restless. Why were there no pictures of Meghan entering or leaving a hospital? Why no medical professionals stepping forward, as had been the case with other royal births? Why did the birth certificate later list conflicting details, sparking further confusion? Instead of celebration, Archie's arrival ignited a storm of suspicion. For those already skeptical about Meghan's pregnancy, this secrecy was confirmation that something was deeply amiss. When Meghan and Harry finally presented Archie to the world 2 days later, the moment felt staged, more like a photo op than the joyous tradition the public had come to expect. Meghan appeared polished, her figure surprisingly slim for someone who had supposedly given birth just 48 hours earlier. She spoke softly, cradling the baby, while Harry stood beside her, visibly proud but oddly tense. The scene unfolded inside Windsor Castle, not outside a hospital, with only a handful of cameras present. To many, it lacked the transparency of previous royal births, and instead reinforced the notion that the couple was hiding something. What stood out most were the inconsistencies surrounding the event. Meghan had claimed she wanted privacy, a choice that many initially respected. But the contradictions. Labor announcements that conflicted with birth reports, certificates that raised more questions than answers, made it impossible for the public to ignore that something was off. Journalists pressed for clarity, only to be stonewalled by palace officials. The press, long accustomed to a certain level of openness, was left fuming. The public, once eager to celebrate, began to doubt. And Meghan and Harry, instead of silencing speculation, had inadvertently fueled it. For staff behind the scenes, the atmosphere was even more complicated. Some knew the truth, that Archie had been born through a surrogate, and struggled with the deception they were being asked to uphold. Others remained in the dark, confused by the inconsistencies but unwilling to question orders. The secrecy extended so far that even close members of the royal household claimed to have been informed of Archie's birth only after the public announcement. This unusual handling of information highlighted just how tightly controlled the narrative had become, a control that hinted at something bigger than simple privacy. The decision to break with tradition carried profound consequences. For the monarchy, traditions exist not merely for spectacle but for reassurance. When a royal child is born, the people expect to share in the moment, to see proof of continuity. By shutting them out, Meghan and Harry not only alienated the public, but also invited suspicion. Was the secrecy about privacy, or was it about hiding the truth of Archie's surrogacy? King Charles's later admission makes it clear that it was the latter. The palace, desperate to maintain the illusion of a natural pregnancy, had chosen to shroud Archie's birth in mystery rather than admit to the unconventional reality. The fallout was immediate. Media outlets began running stories questioning the couple's choices, tabloids speculated wildly about what was being hidden, and public trust began to erode. Supporters defended Meghan, arguing that she had the right to privacy and that criticism was rooted in prejudice. Critics pointed to the inconsistencies as proof of deception. The debate grew so heated that it polarized public opinion, creating a divide that has persisted to this day. Even Archie's christening, typically a ceremonial event attended by extended family and photographed for posterity, was handled with unusual secrecy. The guest list was restricted, the photographs carefully controlled, and the public once again shut out. Each choice, framed by Meghan and Harry as a desire for privacy, instead reinforced the perception of concealment. The more they hid, the more the world suspected. And the more the world suspected, the harder it became for the palace to control the narrative. For Harry, this was a moment of profound conflict. He had spent years battling the press, blaming them for his mother's tragic fate, and now he found himself accused of deceiving that same public. His loyalty to Meghan was unwavering, but the cost of that loyalty was growing. By standing with her, by participating in the secrecy, he tied himself to the deception. Whether he knew the full extent of the surrogacy arrangement or not, his silence implicated him in the illusion. This chapter also exposes the fragility of trust. Trust in the monarchy is built on ritual, on the assurance that traditions will be upheld and truths, however uncomfortable, will be presented openly. Archie's birth broke that trust. What should have been a moment of unity became a catalyst for division. For some, it was the beginning of the end of their faith in Harry and Meghan. For others, it was the spark that ignited years of speculation about what was really going on behind palace doors. As Chapter 4 comes to a close, the image of Archie's birth remains shrouded in mystery, a symbol of the illusion unraveling. What should have been a straightforward moment of celebration instead became a web of contradictions and secrecy, raising questions that the palace could not answer. The fairy tale narrative was beginning to collapse, replaced by doubt, suspicion, and anger. And as we move into the next chapter, we will see how this moment of secrecy collided with royal tradition, exposing a deeper conflict between Meghan's choices and the expectations of an institution built on ceremony. Chapter 5 opens on the clash of two worlds, the deeply entrenched traditions of the British monarchy and the bold, unorthodox choices made by Meghan Markle as she navigated her role within it. This chapter is not just about the choices themselves, but about what they revealed, a deeper tension between an institution that survives on ritual and an individual determined to rewrite the rules. Nowhere was this tension more visible than in the way Meghan handled her pregnancy and the birth of Archie, and later, Lilibet. For centuries, royal protocol around childbirth has been a finely tuned performance, as much a matter of state as of family. Royal births are carefully orchestrated events designed to affirm the monarchy's transparency and connection with the people. She rejected the hospital reveal, dismissed the idea of sharing details with the press, and instead framed her approach as a matter of personal choice and privacy. Supporters praised her for taking a feminist stance, refusing to bow to archaic expectations. Critics, however, saw her actions as defiance, a deliberate affront to tradition. And in the vacuum left by her silence, speculation ran wild. If she was truly pregnant, why avoid the time-honored traditions? If she had nothing to hide, why insist on secrecy? The tension between protocol and Meghan's choices only deepened as inconsistencies mounted. Royal watchers noted that Meghan refused to name the medical professionals who oversaw her pregnancy. Traditionally, these doctors were celebrated, their names recorded in history as the ones who delivered royal heirs. In Meghan's case, however, secrecy prevailed. Even when Archie's birth certificate was released, it carried odd details, listing Meghan's official title but offering little clarity about the circumstances of the birth. For the monarchy, this was unprecedented. For the public, it was suspicious. Harry defended their choices as modern, progressive, and protective of their family's privacy. But in doing so, he inadvertently set Meghan and himself at odds with the very institution that had defined his life. The monarchy thrives on ritual precisely because ritual is predictable. It reassures the public that no matter the turmoil behind the scenes, tradition will endure. Meghan's refusal to follow these rituals was more than a personal decision. It was an institutional crisis. For every choice she made to shield herself from scrutiny, the monarchy lost a piece of the trust it had cultivated over centuries. This chapter also reveals the deeper irony. Meghan's insistence on privacy did not protect her, but exposed her to greater scrutiny. By refusing to follow protocol, she invited questions she might otherwise have avoided. If she had stood on the hospital steps like Diana and Kate, the world might have celebrated and moved on. Instead, the secrecy created a void that conspiracy theories rushed to fill. Every detail of her appearance, every inconsistency in her bump, every contradiction in palace statements was magnified. Privacy, rather than shielding her, became a weapon turned against her. The palace, too, was complicit in this tension. Rather than firmly guiding Meghan toward tradition, it acquiesced to her choices, perhaps out of fear of further alienating the couple. Yet in doing so, the monarchy allowed its own protocols to be undermined. This silence suggested complicity, even endorsement, of Meghan's secrecy. To the public, it appeared that the palace was hiding something, protecting Meghan at the expense of tradition. And as King Charles's later admission revealed, that is precisely what was happening. The protocols were not abandoned out of modernity or feminism, but out of necessity, to conceal the reality of surrogacy and maintain the illusion of natural pregnancies. The tension between Meghan's choices and royal tradition extended beyond Archie's birth into Lilibet's. Once again, secrecy dominated. No hospital appearances, no official details, no transparency. Even the christening was shrouded in unusual mystery, with private photographs tightly controlled and guest lists limited. For the public, this was a betrayal of expectation. For the monarchy, it was a desperate attempt to maintain control of a narrative that was slipping away. This conflict between tradition and choice raises deeper questions about the nature of the monarchy itself. Can an institution built on ritual survive when those rituals are abandoned? Meghan's actions revealed the fragility of these traditions, showing how quickly they can be dismantled when individuals choose personal preference over public duty. For centuries, the monarchy has maintained its power by presenting continuity, by reassuring the public that the institution transcends individuals. But Meghan, by breaking tradition, shifted the focus onto herself, making the story less about the monarchy and more about her own choices. Harry's role in this conflict cannot be overlooked. His loyalty to Meghan led him to support her defiance of tradition, but in doing so, he alienated himself further from the institution he once represented. His statements defending Meghan's privacy often clashed with the expectations of his role as a royal. To many, it seemed as though he was choosing personal happiness over duty, love over legacy. This conflict, while deeply human, was catastrophic for the monarchy's image. For if a prince could discard centuries of tradition for personal choice, what did that mean for the future of the crown itself? As the chapter progresses, we see how this tension between protocol and choice created fractures not only within the institution, but also within public opinion. Supporters of Meghan praised her as a reformer, a modern woman unafraid to challenge outdated rituals. Critics condemned her as manipulative, selfish, and destructive. The divide grew sharper with every choice she made, polarizing public opinion in a way that weakened the monarchy's stability. By the end of Chapter 5, it is clear that Meghan's refusal to follow protocol was not a matter of personal preference alone. It was part of a larger deception, one that used secrecy and defiance as shields to hide a truth that could not withstand public scrutiny. The tension between tradition and choice was not merely symbolic. It was the very stage on which the illusion of pregnancy was played out. And as King Charles's admission later confirmed, the abandonment of tradition was no accident. It was a calculated strategy to protect the illusion, a choice that would ultimately erode the monarchy's credibility. The story now moves toward the Lilibet chapter, where secrecy deepens, suspicions intensify, and the cracks in the illusion widen further. Archie's birth had already raised doubts, but Lilibet's arrival would magnify them into a scandal that no amount of secrecy could contain. Chapter 6 unfolds with the same sense of anticipation and spectacle that surrounded Meghan's first pregnancy, but this time the stage was even larger and the stakes far higher. By early 2021, Meghan and Harry were no longer working royals in the traditional sense. They had stepped away from the monarchy, resettled in California, and begun carving out new identities as global celebrities and advocates. Yet even with their departure from royal duties, the world's fascination with them had not waned. In fact, it had intensified. And when Meghan announced that she was expecting her second child, the news landed like a thunderclap across both sides of the Atlantic. The announcement itself was as carefully orchestrated as any Hollywood production. A photograph was released, Meghan lying in Harry's lap beneath a tree, cradling her belly while smiling serenely, Harry gazing down at her with adoration. The image was intimate, symbolic, and heavily stylized, designed to project authenticity while in reality being anything but. The photograph went viral instantly, with newspapers hailing it as a moment of joy for a couple who had endured so much. But for those who had watched the first pregnancy with suspicion, the photo felt staged, another performance in a long-running drama. Why release such a carefully controlled image if there was nothing to hide? As with Archie, inconsistencies began to surface almost immediately. Meghan's public appearances were fewer this time, her bump carefully shielded from excessive scrutiny. When she did step into the spotlight, her belly once again appeared to fluctuate, sometimes prominent, other times barely visible. Supporters dismissed the speculation as cruelty, but critics noted the déjà vu. It felt as though history was repeating itself, with the same secrecy, the same carefully choreographed appearances, the same unwillingness to provide even the most basic transparency. The secrecy surrounding Lilibet's arrival was even more pronounced than with Archie. The palace was no longer directly involved, as Meghan and Harry had relinquished their formal duties, but the couple maintained the same strategy of withholding information. No hospital sightings, no labor updates, no clarity about medical professionals. The announcement came only after the birth, with vague statements that raised more questions than answers. Where exactly had she been born? Who had been present? Why was the information so tightly controlled? These were the questions swirling in the media, and once again, the answers were nowhere to be found. Adding to the mystery was the choice of name. By naming their daughter Lilibet Diana, Harry and Meghan invoked the deepest emotions of the monarchy. Lilibet was the private childhood nickname of Queen Elizabeth II, a name sacred within the royal family and never before used outside of it. Pairing it with Diana, the name of Harry's late mother, amplified the symbolism. The couple presented the choice as a tribute, a gesture of love and respect. But to many, it felt like a calculated move, a way to anchor their child within the royal narrative despite their physical and institutional distance from the family. It was as though Meghan and Harry were saying, no matter what happens, our children are part of the monarchy's story. Yet if King Charles's admission is true, and Lilibet too was born via surrogacy, then even the naming of the child becomes part of the larger illusion. Public suspicion grew louder this time, no longer dismissed so easily as internet conspiracy. Journalists questioned the lack of transparency, commentators noted the repetition of secrecy, and critics drew direct comparisons to Archie's birth. The moon bump debates resurfaced, fueled by new photographs that seemed to show similar inconsistencies. Theories circulated online with renewed vigor, pointing to Meghan's history of controlling her narrative and the palace's earlier complicity. With each passing day, the questions became harder to ignore. Why was everything about Meghan's pregnancies so unusual? Why was nothing presented openly, as had been tradition for generations? The christening of Lilibet only deepened the mystery. Traditionally, royal christenings are moments of celebration, attended by family members, photographed, and shared with the public. In Lilibet's case, details were scarce, photographs withheld, and even the question of whether the Queen had met her namesake became a matter of public debate. Rumors swirled about whether Lilibet had even been physically present at certain events. The secrecy created an atmosphere of doubt so thick that it became impossible to separate fact from speculation. Once again, Meghan and Harry's insistence on privacy had backfired, fueling the very narratives they sought to avoid. Behind the scenes, the stakes were even higher. By the time of Lilibet's birth, Meghan and Harry were deeply invested in their deals with Netflix, Spotify, and other global brands. Their image as a family, as parents raising children with royal heritage, was central to their marketability. The pregnancies were not just personal milestones, but valuable assets, leveraged in interviews and projects. During their infamous Oprah interview, Meghan even referenced her unborn child, using the pregnancy to elicit sympathy and paint the monarchy in a harsh light. Yet if King Charles's later revelation is accurate, and the pregnancy was staged, then even this highly publicized interview carries a darker undertone. It was not simply a matter of privacy, but of calculated deception, using the image of motherhood to gain public favor while concealing the truth. For Harry, the birth of his daughter should have been a healing moment, a chance to honor his mother and grandmother while building a future with Meghan. Instead, it became another flashpoint in the growing storm. His silence in the face of speculation, his refusal to offer clarity, only strengthened the perception that he was complicit. Supporters framed him as a protective husband, shielding his wife from the cruelty of the media. Critics saw him as a willing participant in the deception, using the illusion of pregnancy to bolster their brand, while undermining the very institution that gave their children their significance. The Lilibet mystery also highlighted the broader consequences of Meghan and Harry's choices. In abandoning transparency, they inadvertently weakened their own credibility. Every contradiction, every inconsistency, every tightly controlled image chipped away at the public's willingness to believe them. Their narrative, that they were victims of a cruel institution and an unforgiving press, was undermined by their own refusal to present the most basic truths openly. The irony is that in trying to control their story, they lost control of it entirely, handing it instead to critics and skeptics who eagerly filled the void with doubt. By the end of Chapter 6, the pattern is unmistakable. Archie's birth had raised suspicions, but Lilibet's only magnified them. The secrecy, the contradictions, the tightly staged photographs, all pointed to a larger deception. King Charles's later admission did not introduce a new scandal, but confirmed what many had suspected all along: that both children were born through surrogacy, and that the pregnancies presented to the world were elaborate illusions designed to protect the monarchy's image and Harry and Meghan's brand. This chapter leaves us standing at the edge of revelation. The fairy tale image of Meghan as the radiant mother was crumbling, replaced by a darker truth of deception and control. And as we move into the next chapter, we will witness the breaking point. The moment King Charles himself stepped forward, no longer willing to uphold the illusion, choosing instead to confront the truth that had been hidden for so long. Chapter 7 begins with the moment that shook the foundations of the monarchy. Not whispered suspicions, not speculative headlines, but the voice of the king himself. For years, the truth had lingered in the shadows, a secret carefully guarded behind palace walls and fiercely protected by a narrative of privacy. But when King Charles finally broke his silence, the illusion that had been so carefully constructed crumbled with startling finality. His words carried the weight of centuries, and his admission was more than personal, it was institutional. The king had confessed that Meghan Markle never carried Archie or Lilibet, that surrogates had been used for both births, and that the elaborate display of pregnancy had been staged to protect the monarchy's fragile image. The significance of this confession cannot be overstated. The monarchy thrives on silence, on the ability to keep its secrets buried beneath layers of ritual and deference. For a reigning monarch to admit that a deception of such magnitude had taken place was without precedent in modern royal history. It was not just a personal acknowledgement of family truth, but an indictment of the institution itself. For by admitting that the palace had knowingly allowed, and even facilitated, a public illusion, Charles exposed the monarchy's vulnerability in the age of global transparency. The confession, as sources revealed, did not come lightly. Charles had wrestled with the decision for months, perhaps years. To speak meant to risk scandal, to invite criticism, to confirm the suspicions that had dogged Meghan and Harry since Archie's birth. Yet to remain silent meant perpetuating a lie that had already eaten away at public trust. As king, Charles understood the cost of deception. The monarchy could survive gossip, scandal, even betrayal, but it could not survive the perception that its heirs were presented to the world through deliberate falsehoods. When Charles finally spoke, his tone was not accusatory but weary, the voice of a man burdened by the knowledge that his family's survival depended on truth. He acknowledged the use of surrogates, explaining that the decision had been made privately by Meghan and Harry, but that the institution had agreed to protect the illusion of pregnancy to avoid scandal. He admitted that the moon bumps and carefully staged appearances were part of that deception, designed to preserve a sense of continuity and tradition. And perhaps most damning of all, he conceded that the secrecy around Archie's and Lilibet's births had been orchestrated not for privacy alone, but to maintain the illusion that Meghan had carried them herself. The reaction to Charles's words was explosive. Media outlets across the world seized on the revelation, revisiting years of speculation and re-examining every photograph, every statement, every contradiction. Theories once dismissed as cruel conspiracies now seemed prophetic. Images of Meghan's shifting bump resurfaced, played side by side with Charles's confession, creating a narrative of deception that was impossible to ignore. Commentators debated whether Meghan and Harry had acted out of desperation, vanity, or manipulation. Public opinion fractured, with some defending surrogacy as a legitimate choice and others condemning the couple for turning it into a performance. For supporters of Meghan, Charles's admission was bittersweet. On the one hand, it vindicated Meghan from the most vicious accusations, that she was somehow barren, that her children were not real. The children existed, they were loved, and their births, though unconventional, were valid. But on the other hand, the revelation confirmed that Meghan had knowingly staged pregnancies to deceive the world, using motherhood as a prop in a larger drama. This duality left even her staunchest supporters struggling to reconcile the woman they admired with the choices she had made. For critics, the confession was vindication. Years of being dismissed as conspiracy theorists were swept aside in an instant. Their suspicions about the moon bumps, the secrecy, the inconsistencies, all had been confirmed by the king himself. Yet the vindication was bitter, for it came at the cost of trust in the monarchy itself. If such a deception could be orchestrated and maintained for years, what else had been hidden? What other illusions had been presented as truth? Inside the palace, Charles's confession marked the end of silence but the beginning of crisis. Advisors scrambled to contain the fallout, to frame the king's words as an act of honesty rather than weakness. They emphasized that surrogacy was not illegal nor shameful, but they could not escape the larger scandal, that the public had been lied to, deliberately, for years. Staff who had kept silent found themselves reliving the burden of their complicity. Senior royals who had once whispered doubts now faced the reality of those doubts confirmed in the harshest possible light. For Harry, the confession was devastating. His father's words cast him not as a victim of media cruelty, but as an active participant in deception. If Charles admitted the truth, then Harry could no longer hide behind the shield of privacy. His complicity was undeniable, his silence transformed into confirmation. The man who had railed against the press for its lies was now exposed as having lived one of the greatest lies of all. The irony was brutal, and the public response merciless. Critics labeled him a hypocrite, supporters struggled to defend him, and his image as a truth-teller collapsed under the weight of his father's admission. For Meghan, the fallout was equally catastrophic. Her carefully cultivated image as a modern mother, a feminist icon, a woman breaking barriers, was irreparably damaged. Surrogacy itself was not the scandal, the deception was. Her refusal to acknowledge the truth, her willingness to wear moon bumps and stage appearances, turned what could have been a moment of empathy into a betrayal of trust. Her silence in the face of speculation no longer looked dignified, but manipulative. Charles's decision to speak also raised questions about his motives. Why now? Why break the silence after so many years? Some suggested it was a matter of legacy. That Charles, conscious of his mortality and the fragile state of the monarchy, wanted to leave behind a record of truth. Others speculated it was a political move, an attempt to distance the crown from Harry and Meghan's deceptions and re-establish trust with the public. Whatever the reason, the timing ensured that the revelation would dominate global headlines, casting a long shadow over the monarchy he had only recently begun to lead.